Amen. Amen. Man, this week we get to wrap up our series on Be Courageous, and I don't know about you, but I've been enjoying it. I've been challenged because it's one of the things I think when you look for opportunities to be courageous, you find them around every corner. And we've sort of gone through this series and we've built it on this little framework of a triangle that if we're going to be courageous, there's sort of three aspects to it. We've got to be courageous personally. And we sort of define that in week one as looking like this. It's our willingness to confront reality, however brutal it may be, and to do what is good, even at the risk of personal physical harm. Then last week we talked about public courage, and that's our willingness to speak up when fear tells us to shut up, our willingness to act when fear tells us to hold back. And today we're talking about relational courage. And again, what we've been saying each week is the reason it's so important that we talk about courage is that if we're going to live a successful life, a meaningful life, a life of legacy, courage is one of the ingredients that needs to be in the recipe. Courage alone won't guarantee that sort of life, but a lack of courage will guarantee you never live that sort of life. And so today as we talk about relational courage, let me just start with a quote that I got from a guy, Joseph Grenny, and I think this just shows how important this is. Joseph Grenny says that anytime you find yourself stuck, stop and ask this question: what crucial conversation am I not holding, or am I not holding well? That most of us are one crucial conversation or a series of crucial conversations away from turning something significant around in our life. In fact, right now, light bulbs might be going off in your head as to whom you need to have a crucial conversation with. I love what Grenny also goes on to say. He goes on to say that if we don't talk it out, we act it out. And so in any relationship where things are a little bit funky, when things aren't quite right, if we're not willing to sit down and talk it out with someone, hey, that same frustration is going to come out, but it's going to come out in the way in which we act because we're not willing to talk it out. And so if we're going to have a definition for relational courage, this is what we've got. It's our willingness to engage in crucial conversations, hold space for difficult and awkward subjects, and say what should be said. Come on, we've all been in that place, right? Where we've been in that meeting and something needs to be said, and we're waiting for someone else to say it, but no one says it. To ask that question, but no one asks it. And we're sitting there saying, am I the one that's going to bring that question or point out the obvious? But there's that moment of hesitation, like, oh, have I got the relational collateral? How's it going to go if I ask that question? We've been around that person, right, who's just letting us down time and time again. And we're saying, like, how do I approach this? How do I go and have that conversation? And some people in this room are masters at crucial conversations. How do we hold space for those difficult and awkward subjects? When we see someone and we know something's happened, do we bring it up? Do we avoid it? Do we say something? Are we comfortable enough to walk into that awkward space sometimes, not knowing how it's going to go, knowing that this could blow up in our face, but hey, we have to do something? Have we got the courage to hold space for the awkwardness, to say what should be said? Crucial conversation again, this is from Grenny. He sort of says crucial conversations often come with three elements. He says that generally the more that you see these and play, the more crucial the conversation. When there's opposing opinions, when people have got different opinions about something, when there's strong emotions, and when there's high stakes. And the higher level of each of those things are in the conversation, the more crucial that conversation is. There's some incredible models out there that can help us with crucial conversations. There's this one from Kim Scott, who has written a book called Radical Candor. And again, you can read this and you can go through this and you can pay big money to understand this model and to learn about it. It's fantastic. There's another model that from Joseph Grenny's book, Crucial Conversations, and you'll see that, and there's a lot of depth, and there's so much stuff there to go like, man, how do we work our way through some of this stuff? And at the risk of offending any academic in the room, sometimes I think that academics can take some things and make them way too complicated, right? It's something that you've almost just got to practice. But rather than looking at a model that someone's come up with, what I want us to do today is look at a masterclass in crucial conversations. Because right now, you're probably thinking of some times in your life where you've had to sit down with someone and have a crucial conversation. Maybe you've sat down on the other side of a crucial conversation and you can reflect back on that and you can, man, that person absolutely nailed that. Wow, they did such a good job bringing that up, talking to me about that. You probably had a couple of experiences where it didn't go so well too, right? That's just part of the human experience. But I think what we see today is an absolute masterclass in how to have a crucial conversation. And to understand how powerful this is and how incredible it is, what I have to do is give you a little bit of the backstory that sets up what takes place in the conversation that's to come. And the backstory to this is found in 2 Samuel 11. And just if you've got kids in the room, this is probably a really good time to maybe find an excuse to go to the toilet and take them with you, because this story is R18. If this was a movie, R18. What takes place in this chapter is the man called David is the king of Israel. Okay, I can just see a couple of parents laughing awkwardly. This is awesome. The man called David is the king of Israel. Okay, so he's got all the money, he's got all the power, he sort of got what he wants. One day he goes, he's upstairs, looks out, and he sees a lady bathing on another roof, and he says, hey, I want her. So he sends the guards, the people with him, over to Bathsheba's house to tap on the door and say, hey, David wants to enjoy some company with you. And she comes back with them to David's house. You guys kind of know what happens from here, just for the sake of the little ones. I'm not going to say too much. And then a few weeks later, right? It can't just be days, right? That's quite not how it works. But a few weeks later, word comes back to David that Bathsheba is pregnant, okay? And so David's like, what do I do? Because Bathsheba's husband at this time, he's out where the kings are meant to be, where David's meant to be, at the front line of the war in battle. So David's like, what do I do here? So not only has David committed adultery, he's then going, how do I cover this thing up? And he has a really smart idea. He says, what I'm going to do is we'll invite Uriah to come back. We'll invite him to come back. Hey, take some time out of the war, come back, rest, take it easy, enjoy some time with your wife. So Uriah comes back, but he refuses to sleep with his wife. He says, hang on a minute, if all the other boys are out there fighting, who am I to be in there having fun? I'm just going to sleep outside. So David's like, plan's not going the way that it should. So he goes, what I'll do, I'll put on a feast. I'll give him a whole lot of food. I'll give him a whole lot to drink. That'll surely lead to something which will cover this whole thing up. Again, Uriah says, no, I'm not going in there with my wife. And David starts to freak out, right? Because he just wants to cover this whole thing up. So Uriah goes back to battle. David starts to get even more devious. He sends a note out to Joab, who's leading the army, and in this note says, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to put Uriah at the very front lines of the battle. David knows if Uriah goes to the front lines of the battle, Uriah's probably going to die. And David's secret will be closely guarded. Uriah goes, sent to the front line. Sure enough, he dies. Bathsheba finds out, goes through a period of mourning, and then David invites her into his house. They have a baby. And that's sort of the backstory to this crucial conversation. Because the crucial conversation is this. God has sent his prophet Nathan to go and have a conversation with David about what David's done. So David's committed adultery. He's tried to cover it up. He's essentially killed an innocent man to cover his own behind. Okay? And Nathan's job is to go and confront David. How did that go for Uriah? Uriah didn't come to confront him, but Uriah paid a pretty big price because David wanted to keep something secret. So as Nathan has to go and have this conversation with David, there's a lot on the line, right? Because who's to say David at that point isn't going to say, like, I was willing to take out Uriah, if you know too. Nothing can stop me from taking you out too. And so just pause for a moment and think, okay, you're Nathan. How would you approach this? David's got all the power. David's got all the might. David makes the law. David, in a sense, is above the law. How would you handle it? What would you do? How would you initiate this conversation? How would you approach him if you were Nathan? It's a pretty crucial conversation, right? Opposing opinions. Yep. Highly emotional. David, you're an adulterer. You've killed someone who's innocent. David wanting to look after himself. Stakes are incredibly high. And Nathan gets sent in to confront him. This is relational courage. I think it'd be so easy to just be like, hey, not my problem, not my responsibility. I've done nothing wrong. God, you can get a message to him another way. I'm just going to sit this one out. I don't know, it's be the easy way, right? But what Nathan does is a masterclass. And yes, what we'll see as we go through this account is God actually gives Nathan a lot of insight into how to have this conversation and what to do. And we can sit there and go, well, that's unfair. Of course, this conversation is going to go well because God's giving Nathan a whole lot of incredible insight here. Can I suggest that the same God that gave Nathan wisdom is the same God that can give you wisdom? That's why next week we're starting a new series called The Invisible Train, and it's all about prayer and our connection with God. And I'll tell you what, that same God that gave him wisdom is available every moment of every day for you and I to connect with, to engage with, to tap into, and to get wisdom from too. So don't disregard this because it simply says the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David the story. That's how it starts. The Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David the story. And this is beautiful because the way Nathan starts isn't by pointing fingers, isn't through accusations, but he starts telling a story. This is the story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich, one was poor. The rich man owned many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had brought. He raised that little lamb and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. What a story, right? Powerful story. Incredible story. And let's see what happens next. What happens when David hears the story that Nathan tells him? David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, David vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity. David heard the story and David's like, this is wrong. This is unjust. This is bad. This person owes him everything. I love the way Nathan crafted this story. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you've got to have a crucial conversation and try to craft a story? Once when one of my kids was young, he's sort of learning some of the stuff from, you read this. This is why we encourage people to read the Bible. We encourage our kids to read the Bible. Hey, 2 Samuel 11's in there too, so be careful. Maybe read it with them. But this is what you can get when you read the Bible. One day I had to have this crucial conversation with one of my kids. Stuff was just going on at school, and I'm like, how do I talk to her about this? Do you know what I did? I just told her a story about a dog and a cat and some other animal. And it sunk in, and she knew exactly what we were talking about, and it wasn't anything silly, but she remembered it. And I credit that to reading this account, thinking like, how smart is the approach? So what Nathan does, he tells the story. David looked at the story, and he was furious because it was so bad. But Nathan doesn't stop there. Imagine just how Nathan's feeling at this stage, right? He's had the courage to begin the conversation. He's told the story. He sees that David's furious. And then look at the words that come out of his mouth next. Imagine the courage it would take to utter this next line. He looks David in the eye and says, you are that man. Oh, that's true. That's harsh. That's not easy to say. You, David, are that man. And then he continues, the Lord, the God of Israel says, I anointed you king of Israel,
and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdom of Israel and Judah, and if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Amorites and stolen his wife. Man, powerful words for Nathan to be saying. A lot on the line. And yet here he is, being straight up with the king. From this time on, your family will live by the sword, because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. And then Nathan again, this is what the Lord says. Because of what you have done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will make this happen to you openly in the sight of all of Israel. Man, what a conversation to have. But look what happens next. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And in the midst of this confrontation, in the midst of this conversation, the way that news came across, the way that it was delivered, David realizes, man, I have sinned against the Lord. I have done wrong. And then Nathan replies, yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. Nathan reminds him, the Lord's forgiven you. But there are consequences. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of the Lord by doing this, your child will die. And I don't have time to talk about how to reconcile all this theologically, and that's really hard to reconcile theologically, right, for a lot of us. Like, how does this all fit together? Like, well, what's God doing? I know God can allow bad things to happen, but does God cause them to happen? And there's a whole lot there, and we're not going to talk about it today. You're smart people. You can do some research. We can have a chat about that. If you're really stuck, talk about it at your group, and your leader will help you out heaps. I love group leaders. They're the best. But we just don't have time to talk about that. But I can't hide that part because it's messy and funky. Like, I can't explain this in 2 seconds. But it's there, okay? But if we just step back from that side of this for a moment, we're like, man, well, let's just look at that conversation that Nathan was willing to enter into. It was powerful. It was meaningful. It was relationally courageous. I want you to think for a moment about the courageous conversation that you know you need to have. Are the stakes that high? Maybe, I don't know. Is there opposing opinions? Yes, I'd say so. That's why, you have to have the conversation. Is it going to be emotionally charged? I'd say so. That's why you're putting it off. But I think if Nathan can go into this conversation, it can hopefully inspire us to go into our conversations. But the reason a lot of us don't have these conversations is sometimes because we feel we haven't got the skills. What if I get it wrong? What if it doesn't go right? And the unfortunate thing is we live in a world today, right, where we treat everything almost as being disposable. We're in a commercial world where we buy something, and if something in our home doesn't work anymore, what do? We just put it in a trailer and take it to the dump and buy a new one, right? Because everything's disposable. You go back a generation or two, and very little was disposable. Like you hear stories how people curtains wouldn't work anymore, so they were starting to get ratty and tatty, so they'd take the curtains down and they'd turn the curtains into clothes because they didn't want to go and throw something away. Or when something in the house broke down, someone would fix it. But we live in a culture today, in a society today where just everything's disposable. And the way that often plays out is even in relationships, right? Or relationships are disposable. Like, this got too awkward. I don't want to have that conversation, so I just won't talk to that person anymore. And we won't remain friends anymore. I don't want to have that crucial conversation with my team at work or with my manager or the person that I'm responsible for managing. So, that's all right. I'll just go and work somewhere else. And then I'll walk away from so much because I just want to avoid the awkward conversation. We've seen that time and time again, right? You see it in churches. Rather than someone having the conversation about something they don't like, it's just, I'll just go somewhere else. Do something different with my time. Rather than leaning in, embracing the awkward, having the crucial conversations. Yet, if we want to live the life that we all want to live and have the relationships that we want to have, we've got to get used to embracing the awkward, of stepping into and having those crucial conversations. And I think just a few quick thoughts that we see from Nathan here, right? But again, there's so much more written, so much more tips and stuff you can get. But I just think what Nathan gives us is such a masterclass in how to do this. The first thing we see was Nathan was willing. Nathan actually went and had the conversation. He was willing. He was willing. Oftentimes when we know we've got to have a crucial conversation, we've got to have a conversation that's going to take some relational courage, we put it off and 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 we put it off. I think it was John Maxwell who told a story about early on in his career. He had a boss, and every time he went to his boss and said, I've got a problem with this person, I don't know what to do. And he says his boss would just look at him and say, John, I think you need to go and have a serious conversation with someone. Why don't you give me a call back this afternoon and let me know how it goes? Kind of implying you've got to have this conversation today, don't put it off. And I'm expecting to hear from you as to how it went. Now we often just put those off where we ignore it. But what we see here was Nathan was willing to step into and have the conversation. The second thing we can learn from Nathan is he was purposeful about the conversation. He didn't just rock up and be like, hey, David, can we chat? I don't know where this is going to go, but he obviously spent some time thinking about it, right? You don't just write a story, come up with such a well-crafted story on the spot. He clearly put a bit of thought into this. Yes, he got some guidance. That probably involves some time of prayer, or I don't know how he got it, but obviously I'm assuming he put some preparation in. He was purposeful about what he was saying and what he was doing. I think you can say that he was caring. He did remind David. He did remind David, hey, that you have been forgiven. He did remind him that he was, in fact, the king of Israel. I don't think David would have looked at him and come across and said, hey, and confessed the way that David did, if there wasn't a sense of care that came from the way that Nathan approached him and Nathan talked to him. And then finally, Nathan was clear. You are that man. It doesn't get any clearer than that, does it? He was incredibly clear. And I think, hey, if you and I have got to go and have that conversation, and the reality is we're always going to have these conversations. If we're willing, if we can be purposeful, if we can go in caring. I was once told that it's not our content, but it's our intent that people push back on. When we can help people understand that we care for them, that when we have these conversations, especially when it's something to do with them, that, hey, we firstly care about their goals, but not only do we care about their goals, because that's like a shared objective, right? But we actually care about them as a person. When we can communicate that, hey, we've got shared goals here, we both want the same thing, but not only do I want us to achieve that goal, I want you to be the best that you can be. When we can create that safety net, people can hear almost anything because it's what they perceive our intent to be, not our content that they push back on. So we can be caring. And when we've done that preparation, it really, really helps us to be clear. I think we can all have those conversations. And I pray that you have the courage to have those conversations. Because it's those conversations that change the trajectory of relationships. It's those conversations that make such a big difference to you in the person you're speaking with. And the truth is, right, none of those conversations ever go as perfectly as you'd hope they would. But they never go as bad as what you project they're going to go either. So I just encourage us. Let's be the people who have courageous conversations. And the reason, again, if for those of us who are here and we've made that decision to follow Jesus, this isn't optional. Jesus tells us that we're called to love one another the way that he loved us. He loved us selflessly. He loved us sacrificially. And he calls us to love each other that same way. And if I really love you, if I'm going to outwork what Jesus has asked me to outwork in my life, how can I not have these conversations? Because I am not loving you if I don't have these conversations with you, and you're not loving me if you're not having these conversations with me. If I see you as disposable, if you see me as disposable, that's not love. That's the opposite of love, right? Indifference. We've got to have these conversations. We have to. We have to. The stakes are too high. It's too important for us to let fear push us back. Remember last week we said this, that fear is a reaction, but courage is a decision. When we think of maybe having this conversation, whatever conversation is that you're thinking about right now, and I think most of you are probably thinking about a specific conversation you need to have with a specific person. That fear, yeah, it's real. It's there, it's present. It's a reaction. But courage is your decision. The fear is present, but your courage to step through that is a step that only you can take. And hopefully we're inspiring you a little bit this morning to take that step. And as I've just spent the last few minutes now just trying to wrap this series together, right? We've talked about 3 types of courage. Personal courage, public courage, relational courage. How do we get the courage? Well, there's this incredible verse where, again, it talks about David. We've talked about David a little bit over the last few weeks. But there's this incredible little verse when David's got his back against the wall, when David's under attack, when people are coming against him. And it says in 2 Samuel that David strengthened himself in the Lord. David strengthened himself in the Lord, or David encouraged himself in the Lord. And I think that is actually the key that we can all adopt to help us be more courageous personally, to be more courageous publicly, and to be more courageous relationally. This is incredible how this comes together. Because yes, we can just motivate ourselves and we can discipline ourselves. We can be like, yes, you're strong. You want to do this. You want to have a better life. Yes. Be more courageous. Be more courageous personally. Be brutally honest with yourself. Face the facts. Yes, you'll be a better person. Be more courageous publicly. It's for the good of everyone. Just man up. Be courageous relationally. Just put your big boy pants on and go and do it. And you can try and motivate yourself, right? And everyone motivates themselves differently. You might have a song you like to play at certain times that just put a little bit of courage in you. You might have a person you look up to that might do it. But what I want to help you see is there's actually a more powerful way than us just standing there like motivating ourselves, encouraging ourselves, trying to strengthen ourselves. I think David got it when he strengthened himself in the Lord. And I'll show you this. This is so cool. This is so special. This is what it tells us in 2 Timothy. Paul's writing a letter to Timothy, and he says to him, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of fear and timidity, but of power, of love, and self-discipline." That the spirit that God has given you isn't one of fear, isn't one of timidity and shrinking back. Rather, it's one of power. And this is the key word, I think, of love and of self-discipline. John, he explains it this way. He says, "For there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. See, when we come to know perfect love, it helps us to be courageous because fear starts to fall away. When we put Christ right at the center of our lives, right at the center of this triangle, you'll see how we can be courageous when we put him right there. See, think about this personally for a moment. Personal courage, right? Personal courage. Are we willing to confront the brutal facts about ourselves? Hey, when we know, not like, oh, this is a lofty theological idea, but when we know that we are unconditionally loved by the creator of the heavens and the earth, isn't it a little bit easier to look at ourselves a little bit more objectively? Because we don't earn our way to God through our performance. See, most relationships built on conditional love, right? I get paid if I'm doing a bad job. If I start just doing no work, doing a really poor job, telling everybody that they suck, doing all of this stuff, I'm going to stop getting the paycheck, aren't I? Because my pay is conditional on my performance. Your pay is conditional on your performance. You try not turning up to work for the next 3 months and see what happens. Okay? You start saying no every time someone at work asks you to do something. No. See how long it lasts. Your pay is conditional on your performance. I've got to love my wife. If I just stop loving her, it's not going to be a marriage that lasts very long, is it? I might have Josh turn up with some knives. Ashton might come around. Josh is a chef. He'll bring some knives. Ashton, he doesn't need knives. He'll just turn up, right? What are you up to, Clint? What's going on here? You've got to love your wife better. It's God's love for you. God's love for me. It's not conditional on my performance. It's not conditional upon me meeting these things. When I realize that his love for me is unconditional, doesn't that make it easier for me to just be a little bit more objective about my life and what's going on? Because, man, he loves me no matter what. And if I'm honest enough to say, man, I'm missing the mark here, and I'm missing the mark here, and I'm well off the mark here, and I'm well off the mark here. Come on, I could run through a list of those areas in my life, just like anyone in here with some real self-awareness could do for their own life, right? Isn't it easier to be real with that when I realize that, man, I'm unconditionally loved? That even though I'm a mess, even though I make mistakes, even though I haven't got this part right and I haven't got that thing right, man, my Heavenly Father still loves me like crazy and still wants the best for me and is still willing to work in me and still willing to want the best for me and come alongside me. Man, it makes it so much easier to be personally courageous when I know that I'm loved, because that perfect love casts out that fear of having to wear masks and having to pretend, because I'm loved, not because of the mask that I put on, but I'm loved because of whose I am. Publicly, isn't it easier to have public courage when you understand that even though the people out there might be against me, the creator of heaven and earth is standing with me? This is what Paul writes in Romans. He says, the spirit you receive does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you have received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. So what's so powerful in there is just this line. When we read this, right, when we went through Ephesians 1, adoption to sonship. And before someone gets upset in the room, Paul's explicitly saying we're adopted to sonship. He's not saying that boys are better than girls. He's not saying that at all. But what he's doing is he's creating a reference for the culture that he was in. And in the culture that Paul was speaking to, if you were a son, you got so much more rights in terms of inheritance than what daughters did. Okay? So when Paul says, hey, look, you are adopted into sonship. But what he's saying is you're not all going to become men. He's not saying this is only for the men. He purposely uses the male, whatever it is, language. He purposefully uses the male language because he says, no matter who you are, whether you're a female or a male, if you are adopted into God, you are given the inheritance that a son receives, which is all access, everything beyond what you could imagine. And when I realize that that's the inheritance that I've got, that so adopted me, Isn't it easier to stand publicly and the people point fingers at me because I know who's standing alongside me or who's standing behind me? Or potentially even standing in front of me, taking all that slack before it gets to me? Man, I can have the courage to confront myself personally. I have the courage to confront myself publicly. And look, as I said before, if the band wants to come up, we have the courage relationally. Because we have to understand this. If that same God that loves me unconditionally, if that same God who's adopted me into sonship, then looks at me and says, Clint, the most important thing that you can do. Well, what's above all else, the most important thing you can do is love others the way that I've loved you. Don't I then have an absolute responsibility to be relationally courageous, to have those conversations? Because that God who's adopted me, that God who loves me, I said that's the one thing you want to do, that you have to do, that you must do. If that's the one thing, right? Love one another as I've loved you. If that's the one thing he's called us to do, don't you think he's going to empower us to do that? Don't you think he's going to give us the wisdom to do that? Don't you think he's going to give us the strength to do that? You see, when we put Christ at the center, that's how we find our courage. That's how we find our courage. Because in the perfect love casts out all fear. And we have the ability to be as courageous as we need to be. As courageous as God wants us to be. So the band are about to lead us in a song. I was going to ask you to stand to your feet and we're going to sing this one. Because its lines are just perfect. Somebody says, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. And as we sing this, let's declare it. Let's just let that truth build up in us. I'm no longer a slave to fear. No. I'm a child of God. I can confront the facts because I'm a child of God. I can stand up in public and do what's right because I'm a child of God. I can have the difficult conversations, not because I'm perfect, not because I know how to tell the right stories, but because I am a child of God. And I think as we sing this and as we declare this, that courage is going to rise up in us. And maybe, just maybe, as we start to sing this, you're going to feel that courage rise up in you. Some of you are going to have to go and put this on your playlist. And every time you get in your car, you're going to have to jam it and turn it up just to build that courage back up. Because, hey, we're no longer slaves to fear. We are children of God.